Cool. So let's get started with the story then. So today the story is The Tortoise and the Hare. And I don't know if all of you have read this when you were kids. I remember, my parents read this to me when I was a kid. And it's always a very memorable story. And I thought it was a pretty funny story when I was a kid. So if you haven't heard of the story, basically, there's a tortoise and a hare. So tortoise is like, a turtle, and a hare is a rabbit. So it's a rabbit and a turtle. And they're in an argument one day, and the rabbit says, "I'm so much better than you, and I'm so much faster than you, and nothing you can do that I can't do better." And the turtle says, "Hey, all right, well, if you think that, I'll challenge you to a race and I'll win." And so they schedule a race for that weekend, and they do the race, and it starts off, and the rabbit just zooms past the starting line. He's way ahead of the turtle. And halfway through, he's just like so arrogant and so sure he's going to win the race. He just decides he's going to start eating some grass and take a little nap in the sun. And when he wakes up, he sees the turtle crossing the finish line, right? And so I think one of the mottos from that story is like slow and steady wins the race, right? And I think it's just such a great story, right? Because like you can immediately see like there's so many kind of morals and lessons like inherently in the story, right? Is that you might be the fastest person in the world, but if you don't actually give it your best, right? If you don't put in your best effort, if you don't put in consistent, persistent effort into, winning the race or achieving your goal, even someone who's really slow, even someone who's so much worse than you can beat you if they're more persistent, if they're harder working, if they're more diligent, right? So I think this story is also has some metaphors along the lines of work life, which is like, efficiency and effectiveness, right? So, it's one thing to be really efficient. Like if you're, a rabbit and you're really fast at like completing work, you can be really efficient at work, right? But if you're not effective, if you're really fast at running the wrong way, you can be really effective at what you're doing, but you can be really efficient at what you're doing by like running quickly, right? And moving quickly, doing things fast. That's efficiency. But if you're doing the wrong thing fast, you're being efficient at the wrong thing, right? And so you're not being effective. So, in life, we have to learn to be both efficient and effective, right? But the most important thing is to be effective, right? Which means working on the right things, doing things the right way, right? And I think, like in school and a lot of our society, like as we're kids, we're often taught that, being efficient is the best thing. If you're the smartest kid, that's the best, right? Or like if you get the right answer the fastest, that's the best. Or, if you're the strongest, biggest, tallest basketball player, that's the best, right? But then you have people like, Allen Iverson in the NBA, who's like this really short guy who can dunk like crazy and, was one of the best players in the NBA. He wasn't the most efficient player, right? He wasn't the tallest. He was not built for basketball. But he obviously trained really hard and worked really well and performed incredibly well at the highest level of sport, right? So, he's kind of like the turtle of the NBA, right? And the thing is, like, you'll see turtles everywhere in life. Like, you'll see, the most successful people in any area, any sport, are often not the people you would expect to be there, right? And because there's not a lot of correlation, as it turns out, between the highest levels of performance and let's say like genetics, right? Or talent, right? And so there's actually this book called Talent is Overrated and talks in detail about this concept of how, you can be born with certain gifts, but if you don't develop your gifts, if you don't work hard at them, you're not going to be better off than other people, right? And you're not going to be much better than average. And so that's the thing is that, we're all given gifts, right? We all have God-given talents, gifts, things we're especially good at or, have special affinity for, or things that we tend to be more curious about and more interested in than other people. But you can't just rest on that alone. Like you can't just expect that your talents are going to make you successful in life, right? I'm sure we've all met someone who's like really, really smart, who like can't seem to can't even hold a job, can't get their stuff together, can't solve simple problems in life, but like, they can solve like astrophysics equations like that, but they can't like figure out how to hold a job, right? So there's lots of people who have talents and skills, but haven't learned to develop them, right? Haven't learned to cultivate them, haven't learned that persistence to really turn their skills into success in life, right? So another way to look at this is also like long-term versus short-term thinking, right? So, the short-term thinking is the short-term mindset a lot of people have is like, oh, I'm really smart, so therefore I'm going to be successful. So therefore I can just go do X, Y, Z, or I can just, it's going to be easy for me because I have this talent, right? It's like it doesn't matter what talent you have. If you live long enough, it's not going to be easy for you, right? If you work at something long enough, eventually it's going to be really difficult, right? Because that's just how nature of life. And so I think in our culture, we have far too much short-term thinking, right? Like a Gawker, remember they were just measuring page views. Like that's all they cared about. Like, how many page views do you get? All right. It was just a very short-term metric. And they're very short-term thinking. They didn't think about the long-term consequences. They didn't think about the long-term profitability, the long-term reputation. There's a lot of things in the long term they weren't thinking about, right? Legal issues, et cetera. Because they were so focused on that short term. They were just focused like, can I get 1 million page views right now? Right? Can I, and that's a really bad way to think about life, right? So there's this great concept of first order, second order, and third order consequences, right? So the first order consequences of something is like, you eat some ice cream and it tastes really good, and you're like, you get a smile on your face and you feel all good because you just ate some ice cream and it's awesome, right? Then there's like the second order consequences, which is, if you eat enough ice cream, eventually you're going to gain some weight, right? And you're going to get a little bit overweight because you ate a lot of ice cream, and that's what happens. It's the second order consequence. And the third order consequence is like what happens after the second order consequence, right? So, enough years of eating ice cream and gorging on junk food, and you're gonna not only be overweight, but you probably develop diabetes or cancer or strokes or heart disease or some kind of other disease will develop, right? So everything we do in life has first order, second order, and third order consequences. And it's kind of like thinking short term and thinking long term, right? So I think a lot of us in our society, we think way too much short term, right? We think way too much about the first order consequences. Like, oh, if I eat ice cream, then I'm going to feel good. If I take the day off work, then I'm going to feel better, right? But we don't think about the second order, third order consequences of those actions. And in my experience, people who are most successful in life are the people who really think about the second order and third order consequences of their actions, not just the first order consequences, right? So like you have to understand, like, when you eat ice cream, yeah, you're going to feel good in that moment, but you also have to think about the second order and third order consequences. So it doesn't mean never eat ice cream, but it means you should probably be really aware of like what you're doing, right? I know, Marcus started a workout program recently, right? And like that's, at the beginning, Mark, it really sucks, right? Like it's like you're tired, you're sore, you're like you have less energy than you did before. It's like the first order consequences of starting a new workout program is like pain, and it doesn't feel good, right? But you're smart enough to know that the second order consequences of being healthier, being fitter, having being less overweight, like being more energetic, being stronger is great. And the third order consequences of like, living longer and having more time with your kids and more time with your family and having more energy, like those are really awesome benefits, right? And so I highly recommend, in anything in your life, think about first order, second order, and third order consequences of your actions, not just what's going to feel good in the moment, but what's going to be the best for me and my life, for you and your life, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, right? So talent's not going to take you that far, right? Talent's, that's a big myth in American culture, especially, is like, the people who are the most successful, the people who are the best, they're the people who are the talented. They have the right genes. They were just born the right way. They landed on the right side of the bed in the morning, whatever, right? But it's not really true. And if you actually look at people's lives, the people who are the most successful, like musicians, for example, is really detailed studies on this. The people, the most successful musicians, the absolute best pianists and violinists in the world, they just practice more than everyone else, right? They just put in more time, they put in more effort, they put in more energy. And so you don't see that, right? Like you don't see all the hours that, this pianist put in, at home, practicing 4 or 5, 6 hours a day, every day for 10 years. You don't see all that work. All you see is you see them on stage and you think, wow, they're so talented, they're so special. But really it was all the work and effort they put into that no one else was really willing to put in that level of effort that made them so successful, right? So success is a process, right? It's not a procedure, right? And that's a big mistake a lot of us make as well, is like we think that, if I just do this one thing, then I'm going to be successful. If I just do, if I just go to school and get good grades, then I'm going to be successful, right? If I just get a good job, then I'm going to be successful. If I just get a good marriage, then I'll be successful. If I just have kids, then I'll be happy in life, right? And then you get there and you're like, well, hey, there's still room for me to grow, right? It's like that mountain metaphor. You're always climbing a mountain, right? So no matter what goal you set for yourself, you're always going to have more goals in the future, right? And Jordan Peterson was talking about this the other day, and it made so much sense. It's like, that's actually how life should be, right? Because if you ever look at your life and you think, well, there's nothing I need to do to improve my life, then there's no reason to do anything, and you'll be completely unmotivated and you'll be pretty miserable, right? So, one way to look at it is like, I'm kind of unhappy because no matter how much I achieve in my life, there's always more to achieve, and I always feel like I have to do more. But I think that's a lot better than to look at your life and say, well, look at all I've achieved. I don't have to do anything at all, and then you're just completely unmotivated, right? So it's built into the human psyche and built into our evolution that we always have to be growing. We always have to be doing something new and trying and achieving and striving. And so success is that process, right? It's that process of growing and striving. It's that process of learning. It's that process of doing, right? It's not some procedure. It's not some one-time thing. So if you ever find yourself thinking, well, if I just do this one thing, then everything's else is going to work out okay, realize that you're tricking yourself, right? Like, it's not really how reality works, right? So think of success as a process, right? It's a process that happens over time, again and again and again and again. And if you go through that process, you'll get the results you want. Whereas if you just try to do the one thing and done, like the get rich quick thing, it often leads to failure, not success, right? Because success is a process, not a procedure. There's another great quote I learned from someone, is that being in a hurry never got me there any faster, right? Being in a hurry never got me there any faster. And I've thought about that a lot in my own life, because I tend to be, by personality or genetics or whatever, I tend to be kind of impatient, right? So I was like, I want to do the next thing, and I'm like, let's go over in like the type A personality, right? And so I thought a lot about like, what does it mean to be in a hurry, right? And so I think part of it is like, hurry is like almost like this belief that like the way things are now aren't good enough, therefore I need to change things right now so that they can be different, so they can be better, right? So, we need this new acquisitions process in place, so like that's bad, and the good acquisitions process is going to be better, and so like that's good, and it's like I want to get that done like right now, right? So that's part of it, is like that kind of belief. But what I've noticed for myself is like it's more of like this experience, right? So when I'm in a hurry, the experience is like fear, right? It's like what's right now is so bad that I have to like fix it right away. And what happens is like I start thinking about it, right? I start thinking about like the future and like how it's going to be better. I start thinking about the present and how it's not good enough. And then I'm not focused on like what I'm actually doing in that moment, right? Like I'm not focused on the conversation we're actually having. I'm not focused on the work I'm actually doing. And that leads to ineffectiveness, right? It leads to mistakes. It leads to, alienating other people when you're not listening to them, right? And so I've thought a lot about like the being in a hurry thing, because it's been big for me personally. And I think that it's so important to not fall into that trap, right? To always be willing to just be present, to know that success is a process, not a procedure. That just because you fix something right now doesn't mean the problem's going to be gone forever, right? It's a process. And if you want to be effective at life, if you want to really get things done well and really achieve great things, you have to be present. Right, like you have to show up and actually be thinking about what you're doing and be focused on what you're doing, right? There's this thing called flow in psychology, which is where like you're just so involved in your work, like you can just work for like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, so involved in playing the violin or whatever activity that you're doing, you're just so engrossed in it, like time just flies by, right? And so a lot of writers experience this, like you're writing something and then you look at the clock, and it's like 2 hours later, and you've got like 10,000 words on the page, and it's like how did that happen? I don't remember where I was the last 2 hours. Like you're just in this other zone, right? And that's when we tend to be most effective, is when we're just totally engrossed in task, right? Not when we're in a hurry, right? Not when we're thinking about the future, not when we're, stuck in our mind or analyzing stuff. It's when you're just totally present in your actions and your activity that you tend to be most successful. So being in a hurry gets in the way of that, right? Because it's like you can't be in the flow and in a hurry. And studies have actually shown that like flow is like when you're most happy in life is when you're in that flow, right? And it's also when you're most productive. So being in a hurry is like antithetical to actually being productive, to actually being happy and actually being successful. So consistent effort is what's going to make you successful in life. Consistent, persistent effort, right? It's like showing up day after day after day, right? Remember we talked about last time is like, being successful is boring. It's just like doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's like the routine, right? But it's that routine that makes us successful, right? Like you can't really be successful as a human being unless you eat every day, right? And like you have to eat like on a certain schedule, otherwise you're going to be like really miserable, right? And so it's like, if you look at our life from that perspective, it's like really boring. You see people like, they go to sleep at the same time and they eat meals at the same time and like they work at the same time and they spend time with their family at the same time, and right. But like it's that routine that we have to have in order to be successful, because everything has a time, right? It's like there's a time to laugh and there's a time to cry. It's like there's a time to work and there's a time to rest, and we have to respect those cycles of life, right? Like, because if you don't respect those cycles, like your life is gonna be a mess, right? Like people who don't wake up at the same time, like they just they mess up their circadian rhythms, like their hormones go all out of whack and they have mood swings, right? Like all kinds of bad things start to happen when you don't respect the natural cycles of life, right? So this other quote from Tony Robbins. He said, people tend to overestimate how much they can achieve in 1 year and underestimate how much they can achieve in 10 years, right? And I think that's so true. Like so many people think that I can do so much in this week, this month, and like we get all excited about something, we get like passionate or like manic about something, we get super excited about something, we think, oh, I'm gonna write this book and I'm gonna write in like 3 months and I'm gonna do so much, and oftentimes you go through that process and you realize, well, I thought it was gonna take 3 months and it actually took like 9. So you kind of overestimate how much you can achieve in a short period of time. But then if you look at your life from a bigger perspective, like 10 years, people can dramatically underestimate how much they can achieve in 10 years, right? And I think it's just part of like just human psychology. Like we have a certain way of looking at the world, right? And so if you work persistently towards something, you'll be amazed how much you can achieve in 10 years, in 20 years, right? Like you can't even imagine right now what your life is going to be like in 10 years, right? And if you do the little things well, like if you're effective at your life, if you're effective at your work, if you're effective in your relationships, if you're effective at taking care of your health, like you'll be amazed. You'll be in awe of like how far you can go in 10 years, like how much you can achieve, how much you can accomplish. And so I try to remind yourself of that, right? Like when you're down, when you're depressed, when you're like feeling stuck, remember like how much you can achieve. And if you give yourself that time, give yourself that space, respect like the cycle of life, right? So there's this other thing we've talked about before, is like life is short, right? Like one way to look at life is like life is really short, so we should be grateful, we should appreciate it. But there's another way to look at life, is like life is really long, right? Like when you think about like how many days like we just we're sit at home and with family, or like watch, like how many movies are you gonna watch in your lifetime? Like a ton, right? Like how many books are you gonna read? Like life is really long, right? And it helps to look at life in that perspective, right? Because life is really long, but it's also really precious, right? It's like having both those ideas in your mind at the same time. Like life is really long, but life is really short. I found that there's this quote that like if you can hold two conflicting ideas in your mind at the same time, that's a sign of like an intelligent or wise person, right? And so when you have those two ideas, life is short and life is long, in your mind at the same time, you can start to see that like you can have many days in your life, like many days in your life to work, right? To do work, to take care of your health, to be with your family, to build relationships, to have an impact in the world, right? And if you squander those days, if you waste that time, if you're working on the wrong things, or you're in a hurry, or you do a little thing that messes it up, that has impact, right, over time, and it grows, it scales, like it's like this exponential curve. It's like the more time you waste, the more time, like the more it snowballs in your life, right? It's like a little bit of ice cream is okay, but like at a certain point, a little bit more ice cream just makes things so much worse, right? And so we all have this kind of limit in life, this natural like human limit. Like water is great, but you can also kill yourself by drinking too much water, right? It's like there's a minimum amount you need for living, and then there's like the optimal amount to have, and then there's like way too much, right? And I think it's the same way with about everything in life, right? Like work and sleep and food, all these things, right? So having that perspective that life is long, and having that perspective of like what the cycles of life are like, I think is going to help you make better decisions on a day-to-day basis, right? So do a little bit of work, do a little bit of rest, spend some time with your family, take care of your health, like do a little bit of everything every day. Like don't put it off. Like that's what a lot of people do. They say, I'm going to work really hard for the next 5 years and, make a lot of money. And then I'll worry about having a family. I'll worry about my relationships. I'll worry about my health later. And then they kind of go down that path long enough. And then they realize like everything else in their life is in shambles because they spent all their energy and effort on this one thing and they let go of all these other fundamentals. Right. So it's really important to make sure you're taking care of everything in your life. Like don't let it slip. Don't lie to yourself saying you're just going to focus on this for a little bit of time and let everything else in your life slip, because then you start going in the wrong direction. So there's another story I'm going to share. And it's a story of, a guy gets into line, right? It's like, this is you, like, this is us. Like we get into line, right? Like, so, think about like big long line, like waiting for food to order food or something, right? And like, that's like success in life. It's like you get in this line, like you show up, in your career, and you want to be a great editor. So you get in line, you're at the end of the line, like you start at the bottom, right? And then you have to like, you have to work and you have to wait and you have to be patient, you have to learn, you have to study and you keep growing. And eventually if you keep working at it long enough, like the line moves forward, right? And eventually you kind of get to your goal of, having your own imprint to run, right? Jacob, or something like that, right? So the problem with a lot of people is like, we get into that line and we start working at something. And because life is long and because, we're in a hurry and because we don't have that long-term perspective of how much we can achieve in 10 years, after a year or two, we think, it doesn't look the way I thought it was going to look when I thought I was going to look that way, right? Like I thought I was going to be so much farther ahead by now. I thought I was going to have so much more by now. It's not looking the way I expected it to look. So then you feel, discouraged, depressed, you feel down, right? And that's when we tend to make bad emotional decisions, right? It's like, like you leave the relationship because you're like, oh, it's not looking the way I thought it was going to look. Or you leave the job because it's not looking the way you thought it was going to look. Or, you switch careers because it's not the way you thought it was going to be, right? And the problem with making switches in life like that is it's okay. Sometimes it's like a good idea to make switches, right? But if you make that switch when you're in just this bad emotional state, we tend to make bad decisions. And so we get out of line, right? Like you're like halfway through the line to achieving your goal and you get out of line and you quit and you go do something else. And then like, a month later, you're like, oh, I regret what I did. That is actually the goal I really wanted to achieve. And so then you try to go back to it and like you get back in the line, but you can't like cut back in the line. Like that's not how life works. So then you have to get back in the back of the line again. Right. And it's like so many people I'm sure you see in life, like, they get in the line, they get impatient, they get out of line, they try to cut back in line, but they can't. So they go to the back of the line. Like they go in this cycle of just like not getting much done in their life because they're so impatient, right? Because they're not willing to put in that consistent effort to achieve their goal because they, and you see it with everything. It's not just like work. It's like, think about like health, right? It's like, you have a workout plan, you do it for a little while, you achieve your weight goal, and then you quit on it. And then, you're back to the same place a little bit later, right? And then you have to start all over again from scratch, right? And I know I've done this many times in life, right? Like, especially like workouts and that kind of stuff. So, we all do that. And I think it's really important to stay focused on what is your long-term goal? What do you really want for your life? And even when you're down, even when you're depressed, even when you're, struggling in life, like stay focused on that and remind yourself, like, don't get out of line. Like, don't be in a hurry. Don't try to rush to something else. Really take your time and invest the time every day to work a little bit on each of your goals and all the different areas of your life. And if you do that, I think you're going to be a lot more successful and a lot more happy. So I hope that's helpful for you guys. So we're going to do a quick writing exercise now. And so the first question is like, what did you expect to look a certain way at a certain time in your life, but it didn't turn out that way? And what have you given up on in life? Like, did you ever get out of line? Did you ever quit something that was really important to you, but at the time you just felt like it wasn't worth it and you quit and you gave up, got out of line? Have you ever tried cutting back into the line? And like, what was that like? Like after you quit something, it's really important to you and you tried to get back into it. What was that experience like for you and how did that work out? And then where do you need to cultivate persistence and patience in your life? Like, where do you need to realize that, this thing that you have, this thing that you want to achieve, this place you're going in life, it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take years. It's not just like an overnight thing for you. And so where do you need to cultivate that persistence and that long-term perspective and that patience in your life to make sure that you don't give up in the middle before you achieve your goal? So let's work on this for a couple minutes and then discuss.
Being in a rush always doesn't always get you home early or get you to where you wanted early. So You ended up like you got nothing.
And yeah, I mean, another lesson I take from that too is like, the importance of setting a goal after the goal, right? It's like having a 2 month contest where like, you do your best job. Like like you can achieve so much in 2 months, right? Like it's awesome. The problem is like if you don't have something after that, and it's just like, well, it's like this, you reach the peak and it's like this huge letdown. And it's like, what's the point anymore, right? So that's why we always, we set quarterly goals and we always talk about them, and like, because you always have to like set what's the next mountain, what's the next peak, right? There's this thing with like astronauts, like going to space is like their whole life's mission. Like after they get back, they're often depressed because like they need some other goal, they need some other thing to achieve in their life, right? So just be kind to yourself, like constantly remind yourself, like after you achieve something great, like celebrate, high five everyone, have a nice dinner, but next morning set a new goal and go towards the next mountain, otherwise you're going to be miserable eventually, right?